here. Okay, so this would be our quiz 1 for DM140, and it will be covering lessons 1 to 4. So there's quite a bit that we learned, but in general, before I get started, if you felt pretty good about doing project 1 and 2, or project 1 and getting the capstone done, you felt okay with using the tools, you should be in okay shape for the quiz. The part that makes it a bit more difficult is the wording sometimes, so feel free to double check with me on the wording. During this review, please make note of any area that just seems way too complicated or over your head. We could take time and dissect it. But for now, just be aware that lessons 1 to 4 are in it as well, and a bit of, as today is session 5, those will be what we were covering. So here's a little bit of the basics here, and I can go ahead and let me see if I can zoom in. Kind of want to do, let me try to present it real quick then. Awesome. So a very quick overview of the basics here. Again, you can hide layers by hitting the eye tool that's next to them. That's just a screenshot of it as well. That's probably the go-to one that everyone knows. And if you remember, there's a small one here as well. And this is different than what I did earlier with the text, with selecting pixels with the text. There's a way to select all pixels inside of your image. And we don't do it too often in the projects, but if you go into your Photopea, and let me just restart this image here. Let me open up the start of this one. If you see here, I have all these images here. And if I go over to my tab and I control click onto this thumbnail image here of my background, if I hold down the control key and I left click on it, you'll notice that I actually select every single pixel, so the entire frame of my layer. So then if I hit edit and cut or anything, you'll notice my entire image is gone. So if one of the questions says something along the lines of like, how do you select all the pixels or anything, that's your go-to way of doing it. You could also go to, you could always do the rectangle tool and select it all as well, but if you want to be able to select every single pixel properly, you would hold control and click onto your thumbnail. And now I have my image selected here. Awesome. Now again, your history is always up here. And there's a few questions regarding backstepping and forward stepping. And I just want to make sure everyone understands, wherever you keep the history is going to be in this history tab. Make sure you don't select anything that doesn't say that. And if you want to undo an action, what you can do, you can go up to edit, and step forward means that you go and redo an action you did, and step backwards is your undo. And if you can see here, you have a different shortcut for them. So Control and Z is undoing. So let me see here. Let me just do a quick example using a brush here. Let's say I painted all over my nice project. I did it a few times all over the place. And I'm going okay, and I don't like how this looks, so I'm going to hit Control Z. And then I don't like how that one looks, so I'm just going to keep clicking Control Z. But I do like how the big one looks, so I'm going to hit Control Shift and Z, and it's able to repaste my brush tool. And again, you don't need to use these right away. You don't need to keep clicking them as you'd like. You can simply click on the history pane on your top right side to select where you would like to go with your tools. But again, edits, step forward, step backward. I would say remember these, and also remember the shortcut keys that they have. Of course, you're free to look at Photopea during as well if you'd like, in case I'm not trying to ask you to make notes of every single shortcut. That would be insane. There's a lot of them. But please make sure you know how it goes, and please make sure that there is no limit for the amount of times you can undo something. It is simply how far that I can go back. So if you see here, I can click Control Z all the way back to my opening of my project here. And I can also press Control Shift Z and go all the ways back down to my ending goal that I had. Now, there's a few questions here about flattening. And you might have done it a few times, or you might have accidentally done it or seen it before. But what flattening does is a way for you to reduce the overall size of your image. And let's just get rid of some of these brushes here. Let me very quickly add in an adjustment layer that we did earlier. Maybe I'll do a black and white one again. Now, let's say that I finished this project and I have it done and I want to send this as a single PSD. So like I only want one layer. What I can do is I can right click on the topmost layer and I can just hit this flatten image option. And now you'll notice that I flattened all of my layers together. So they all got flattened like a stack of pancakes again. They all got squished into one. And of course, I can still edit this image as I'd like, but there's a downside of it, and is that you cannot edit the separate layers again after you flatten an image. So make sure you remember that flattening an image is it's not permanent. As you can see here, I can go back up to flatten and then one above it. And I can undo the flatten so that I get back my black and white layer. But if I were to save my PSD after I flattened it and tried to open it again, I'd only see the one layer. So make sure that all of your editing is done before you flatten an image. There's a small amount of questions about what to do if your panels are not visible. For instance, maybe the action panels aren't visible, or let's say that the layers panel was hidden. If at any time any of your panels on the right side are not visible to you, you can go to Window and then just select from the drop-down menu which panel that you want to see. So let's say that my action panels is gone. I can hit Window and I can hit Actions, and then I have this new panel called Actions. You don't need to worry about that panel though. A more important one is maybe the layers. If you see here, I close my layers pane and now I'm stuck. I don't know what to do. I can go to Window, Layers, and now I have it back and visible on my right side here. So if you're ever stuck, or if a question is asking you about how you can get open to something, check out the Window tab up there and see what you can do from there. So there's also another option here with the zoom tool that we haven't seen yet, and this might be interesting for some of you as well if you haven't zoomed in all the way. So again, Photopea and Photoshop, the way it operates is that each pixel is a color, and eventually there's so many pixels together that they create an image, right? So as you can see here, these are all different colored pixels, very small. But if I zoom out all the way, you'll notice that each pixel makes up an entire image itself. If I right click, and there's this option here called pixel to pixel 100%, and I click that, that will zoom you in. It's supposed to zoom you in a bit more so you can see the pixels as well. But one of the questions is asking about how you can see the pixels of each one of the areas here. And using the pixel to pixel is one of the ways you can do that as well. So if any question is asking about that, check out this option as well. But there might be other ways to go about it too. Now there's one more question as well, talking about that arrow. And simply enough, that arrow that we see here is a way so that Photopea can hide tools from us and not have us overwhelmed with a ton of tools. And again, if you click on the arrow, sometimes it works for me. There we go. If I click on the arrow at the very edge, I get access to the hidden tools, or you can simply right click on it to get access as well. But clicking on the arrow will allow you to get to those tools. There we go. I don't know why they made it so tight though. Awesome. And again, we talked a bit about the type tool earlier, but if you're asked about text, or you might be asked about what does the type tool do, it just adds in text that is editable. That's a big thing again in the questions is text that you can edit. That's what the type tool does for you. Awesome. So now we have a few more items here. And again, I don't want to read off all these slides to everyone. I will share these with everyone for your own review as you go forth. But again, if you're ever working with a few of these questions, you're ever stuck, feel free to reference this in case it might help out. If you go to the layers here inside of this pane here. And if you're ever asked on the quiz about how you can resize or edit a type of layer, the go-to way that I go about it is by selecting my layer, going to edits, and then using this option called free transform. Or you can also use Alt, Control, and T. You can technically use transform as well, but free transform seems the most easiest because you're able to just drag and select wherever you'd like to go with this layer or how big or small you would like it to be. Awesome. That's kind of moving around your layers and stuff like that using free transform. And of course, just like everything in Photopea, you can undo the action if you don't enjoy it. Again, the adjustments is something that I was just showing here. This is an adjustment filter. The main thing about the adjustment versus the regular filters, and this is again is a question on the quiz, is that the adjustments don't. Oh, is it on this? There it is. Sorry, the adjustments aren't permanent and they can be turned on or off. So they're non-destructive. That's one way you can describe them. As you can see here, my background layer is not permanently black and white. I can turn it off whenever I'd like. However, if I added a black and white filter to this, if I added a black and white filter to this background image, I would have to undo that filter because I cannot turn it off like I can an adjustment layer. So that's your main difference here against filters. Filters kind of work on the image itself, whereas adjustment layers act as a separate layer that you can put above other layers. Now, another thing that you should note about adjustment layers is that they have no image data, meaning that they don't care about what is underneath them. They're just going to make it black and white. So that's pretty much the main thing about them as well. Not too complicated, but I will say that sometimes the terminology can get a bit muddled. So if you're ever reading a question and you're like, I have no idea what this is asking me, just let me know. It's better to ask me first than to just try and guess it. Now, everyone's favorite, I think, is the selection here. I'm sure everyone loved Project 2. These selection tools are super vast. There's 8 of them in total. And each of them are a bit different. Now, if you notice here, you might have seen this before. This is actually from your Project 2, if you're working on that as well. I just kind of screenshotted it because this does a very good job of breaking down what the quiz also breaks them down as well. So one of the quiz questions, for instance, is asking, is the lasso select tool a geometric selection tool? And if you notice, if you look at this sheet here, you'll notice that the geometric selection tools are only rectangle and ellipse select because they select in a geometric shape. Whereas the lasso select is a freehand tool that we use our hand to select with. So that question will be false because the lasso select is not geometric, it is a freehand. Now, this is where you might get a bit confused, is because these tree selection tools are in the one area, but they're actually 2 different types. The object selection tool, it identifies a subject or a type of object within the square that you draw out. So it's going to assume by edges, what the object is. And the quick selection tool, it paints a selection, and that also defines edges right away. So what I would say is that object and quick selection are based on the edges, as it says here. And then your magic wand tool, as we said earlier, is a very unique one that uses color. So magic wand uses color of your pixels. And again, how does it know which pixels are what color? Well, again, if we zoom all the ways in, we can see that each pixel is a different type of color. So it's just going to pick all the ones that look of the same color there. Now, there's quite a few questions regarding selection tools, so I would say take your time and review this slide. I don't want to read all of this off to you. There's a few hints there as well with it. But I would say reread these and just make sure you know your tools. The freehand ones are all lasso. That's a very good way to remember them. If any question is talking about freehand selection and they don't include a lasso select, you can assume that they probably are wording it wrong or it's supposed to be false. The other ones, because you take 3 out of the 8, it's a bit easier to separate them as well. Your rectangle and ellipse are always going to be geometric. These guys are a bit more complicated, but looking at them a bit more in depth is always helpful. There's one more thing I wanted to show off that we might not have covered too often. And of course, when we're making selections, we can use our freehand. What I mean by freehand is just randomly go about it. So if I hit my rectangle select, I can go about and let me hit select deselect, or control and D to deselect to erase my selection here. But I can go about and make my selection wherever I'd like. But there's a way, and again, this is on the, on the quiz as well. There's a way that you can start selecting from the center point. I'm using Windows, but if you're on Mac, it will be the Option key. If you're on Windows and you start selecting and you hold the Alt key, Alt, which is to the left of your spacebar, you'll notice that my square gets really big and it actually starts selecting from a center point. So I'm still dragging out my rectangle like normal, but you'll notice that it starts selecting from a center point after I hit my Alt key. Now, how do I do this again? What happens if I hold the Alt key and then I start dragging? Again, it's fine, but it's going to drag from wherever I start dragging and holding the Alt key as my center point. So again, let's say I want to select this sand dollar. I can hold Alt, start dragging, and then I can make a nice selection, kind of like this. Awesome. Again, not perfect, but you know, it's decent enough for what it does, especially if it's geometric. And this also works with the ellipse tool. So if I hold Alt and I select out, you'll notice that my ellipse tool goes around from the center point. So if any question asks you about the center points, remember the Alt or Option key on the Windows or Mac respectively. And again, I said here don't hold Alt, but sometimes it works, sometimes it's finicky. But just remember that the Alt key is the one you'll be using in order to drag it out from a center point. Very quickly, just select text one more time. I'm gonna keep saying this until you're sick of me saying it. If you hit your type tool, which creates editable text inside of your image, and select anywhere, let me make this really big. Hello world. Now with this selected here, if I want to be able to make my text a bit different colored or anything without selecting the entire guy, I will right click on the text layer with the T, and I will hit select pixels, and that is how I select the letters that are a part of my text. That is a question on the quiz, so that's kind of a freebie for right now. Forgot which question number it was though, but if you right click on this and hit select pixels, that's how you will select the actual letters that are part of your type tool. And I was doing this from the get-go out of force of habit, but Control and D is a very neat way for you to on-the-fly undo selections. So let's say I'm using my lasso select tool and I'm dragging it around and I don't like how it looks. I can hit select deselect to restart, or I can simply hit Control and D and it will undo my option for me. As you can see here, it's actually a lot quicker than having to go all the ways up to select and deselect. And eventually, if you get the hang of it, you're able to do it a bit better. But Control and D is your shortcut for deselecting a selection you created using one of the 8 selection tools. Now, this might be where I lose a few people, if I haven't lost any of you already. But again, with these, I took some images and I'm going to be recording it so you can watch this as many times as you'd like. But for these, there's a few small things that we don't always use, but are helpful. And because they're on the quiz, it's important to know them as well. But they might be a bit odd at the start. But there's 2 modes inside your selection, which are Unite and Subtract mode. You might have seen these already. You might not have seen them at all. But the subtract mode is imaged down here with a bit of a circle cut off in the center and then the remainder on the other side. And the unite is one that's the second one that's on the left over here. and it has 2 full circles. Now, the questions on the quiz are talking about what hotkeys you use with Unite and Subtract modes. But before I do that, I just want to show off what Unite and Subtract modes are. So let's zoom into our trusty sand dollar again. We have a lot of examples with this guy. And again, just like the Project 2 instructions, I'm going to select quick selection and then select the sand dollar. Oh, and make sure my background's selected. And then if we remember, we wanted to just select the sand dollar and not the red that's around it. So what I had to do after that is go to my magic wand. And then I would go up to the subtraction option up here. And then what the subtraction option does, is it takes whatever selection you have and subtracts from it based on what you select. So if I have my magic wand here, and I have my subtract mode selected, if I select my red, it will subtract. Oh, hopefully it does it properly. Let's see, let me clean up a few of these. Sometimes my things never go as planned, sorry. This should subtract from me the sand dollar. It's keeping the edges along it a little bit, but that's fine. But if you notice here, it's subtracting the red from my sand dollar again. So if you see here, I don't like the red that's on it. So I'm just going to go ahead and select the red. And now if I move my sand dollar, I do have a few lines, apologies for that, but I have the red away from it. Now let's say that I subtracted the sand dollar, but I'm working for someone and they want the red on it for some reason. So I got to keep the red on it. How do I go back without deselecting and add back into red? Well, we notice that we haven't used this mode yet, but there's one called Unite. So if I select my magic wand again, and I select Unite, what will happen if I click on the red? It will simply add the red back into my selection area, right? So before I used Unite, I didn't have any red in my sand dollar. I hit magic wand, I selected Unite, which is the second option up here. I selected my red, and now, lo and behold, I have my original red here. Now, for the quiz, your hotkeys for these, let's just try to do this again using hotkeys, and I'll make sure to point out what's going on at the top. Let me select my magic wand, and now this mode right here is your normal magic wand mode, so you're not adding or subtracting. If you want to subtract from your selection without having to hit subtract up here, you hold the Alt key or Option key on Mac, Alt key on Windows. If you see right now, I'm holding Alt, and what does everyone see is highlighted in the top. It's kind of hard to see from here, but if you look at the top up here, my subtract, when I press Alt, is being highlighted. So if I hold Alt and I click on the red, I get the exact same effect of subtraction. Let me subtract from my image. Now, how do I go and unite this back, the red back to my image? Well, if I hold the Shift key, the Shift key does my uniting for me. If I hold Shift and click on the red, I now have my original full sand dollar with my red background back. Awesome. Oh, so sure. I could take a look at that after this one here. Sometimes it works fine, but other times, yeah, there's some issues that could arise with it as well. And again, because the quiz is multiple choice, you'll just be asked about some of the hotkeys and stuff. So again, Shift will be your unite, and Alt will be your subtract. Awesome. Now I just have a few more spots about the healing tools and the patches and fixes. These was from, I have a lot of videos detailing these as well. But for instance, the patch tool, spot healing brush tool, is really good for just fixing up small blemishes on anything. As you can see here, it's even doing a really good job with this sand dollar. It's making it look a lot nicer. As you can see here, no more blemishes here. Of course, if I go through the actual outline, I think I should fix it. Yep, so it will just make this a bit more plain. The clone stamp tool and the healing brush tool I have attached explanations here for what they do, but these two tools are very similar, and what they do is they copy from your target area. The question on the quiz regarding these tools is the hotkey that you use, and the hotkey that you use for the clone stamp tool before you start, it tells you even in Photopea is the Alt or K is one of them. You can press Alt, and I will bring up this cross that I can use for copying. So if I bring up this cross and I click on this shell, you'll notice that whenever I draw, I am now drawing an exact copy of wherever my cross is here. See here? Go down a bit more. Maybe I could go up here too. Make sure no one's in the waiting room. Okay, great. Awesome. And now again with the healing brush tool, it's functionally the same. I hold Alt and I push it down here, and I pretty much get the copying here as well. We use the clone stamp tool more often than the healing brush tool, but they're very similar and they both use the same type of hotkey for the fixes as well. You want to make sure that the healing brush tool and the clone stamp tool have a sample or a chosen area before you start. So one of the questions is regarding what you need to do before you start cloning. And very simply, if you open up Photopea and you select the clone stamp tool and you start trying to draw, or let me, excuse me, if you noticed from earlier, it gave me that error about the holding Alt. You have to select which thing you're going to copy first before you start drawing with it. If you don't select that, you won't be able to use this tool and it won't work for you. So make sure before you start using this tool, you select the area that you're going to copy from. Awesome. And now there's this one guy here, the content aware patch tool. The go-to textbook definition says that we remove large unwanted elements from an image. But essentially what we're doing with this patch tool, as we used it before, is we essentially go, I forgot what it was, sorry, content aware move tool. Which one is this one? Oh, I called it patch tool. I think it was supposed to be called move. Sorry, everyone. So this one with the move tool here, after I have this move for us anywhere we'd like to go, we're able to essentially get these large objects out of our space here. Make sure I'm using the content aware move tool. So with this content aware move tool, I'm able to essentially freehand select a big object here. Let me go back. Oops. My thing froze a little bit. And it makes it so that the content that's around it, essentially like in one of the cow images or anything as well, it applies techniques to it so it doesn't look too bad. But let's just say I have this big guy right here. I can select him and maybe I could just move him down here or something. Now the same guy is here as well, but the content aware move tool is very useful when we're supposed to have these big objects that we're moving. And it's not the same as the patch tool. If you notice now, my big object is gone from where it was before. The patch tool, if you recall, is a freehand drawing as well, but it uses, based on source or target, it uses the original image to try and find new things to paste over. The patch tool isn't too much on this test as much as the content aware move tool. And the content aware move tool is just one really big question in regards to what it's doing. And essentially what it's doing is it's using a bit of AI here in order for us to successfully move these objects out of wherever they were originally. This one takes a bit of time, but it does a really good job. And you'll notice here that there's not too much left over. There's a little blemish behind it. I can just grab the spot healing brush tool. I think the might actually be my monitor, sorry. Awesome. But essentially that's what that one's doing there. All right. I think that's all I had. I've been talking for a while. Are there any questions in regards to any of these tools that we covered? I went through a lot in a short amount of time. Is there anyone who's really lost on a topic or would like me to revisit any of them? Everyone's super ready for the test. All right, awesome. So what I can do here.